This is the
Five Stars
Podcast.
Let me talk to you. This is such good shit.
You know, I really wanted to start the intro to this show with just MFing everything about Dynamite, but I did a little research this week, and I found out that YouTube videos that contain swearing within the first 5 or 10 minutes of the video usually do not do well in algorithms, which is classic if you think about that for more than 2 seconds. You know, you're sitting there running down every swear word in the English dictionary in the first 10 seconds of a video. Well, that's not cool. Can't have that. But you got a 2-hour podcast going. Oh, by all means, go crazy with your sailor mouth, son. Ain't nobody gonna stop you now. But enough about YouTube and their stupid setup to fail system. Today's 5-Star Wrestling Podcast is going to be a fun one. We got 2 great classic episodes of wrestling to talk about, and 1 not-so-good episode of Dynamite, which was kind of to be expected. I mean, no MJF, no CM Punk, no Bryan Danielson, and the main event had Jon Moxley going over to qualify for a chance to be the world champion again. So, I definitely took 1 on the chin this week. Sure, everyone else thought it was all kinds of star-spangled awesome, and if for some weird reason you're into Jon Moxley and that whole shtick, more power to you, bro. That's all I'm gonna say. So, why not? Let's just get into it. Since we're already on the topic, and by the way, subscribe, like the show, comment, all that good stuff. If you're new to the show, you're watching for the first time, we're on YouTube and Rumble each Monday and Friday for new content, so you will definitely want to hop on board if you enjoy hearing controversial wrestling opinions, especially when it comes to AEW's product. So, as they announced last week, they were opening the show with the Gauntlet Battle Royal, and you've heard me rant about multi-man matches before, so I'm not going to get into that whole tirade again. But I do need to ask, even if you're an advocate of 3-ways and 4-ways and 6-mans and all that, aside from the Royal Rumble, do people actually enjoy battle royals? Even when they do layered entrances and things, like, I don't know. Maybe it's just because I'm old and crusty and I've seen a million of these things throughout the course of my life, but I always thought these matches were so lame. And again, aside from the Royal Rumble, where it's once a year, and the match itself already kind of has an intriguing gimmick behind it, booking a cold battle royal on television in 2022 is such a turnoff for me anymore. There used to be big draws back in the day for house shows back in like the 70s, especially when Andre was involved. But that was also when star power was bigger, and they also weren't televised in most cases. But seriously, I want to know if people actually get entertainment value of watching these things at home. I can't tell you how many times I started falling asleep watching this, especially when there's like 15 guys in there doing absolutely nothing because, well, they can't do anything because guys are either laying on the mat or piling up by the ropes, so you can't really do any form of wrestling. And they booked this with those stupid casino rules where everyone out comes in clusters based on card suits they randomly draw. I never understood that whole gimmick. I always thought it was kind of dumb. It also took me until they actually rang the bell where I found out that one of the guys in the ring from the start was Lance Archer. No entrance, no fanfare. He's just standing there in the corner like a total jobber. We had a classic AEW moment here early on. Speaking of Archer, they had him and Keith Lee do the big Haas guy face-off. And as soon as they came to blows for the first time, they chose that moment to cut the camera to the Jumbotron to show the countdown clock. Great timing, guys. And even better, the clock counted down to 0, and then nobody came out. If you actually pay close enough attention, you saw the little graphic on the Tron that said jointhedarkorder.com, but there was no music. So, yeah, someone jumped the gun there. Just, this company's so bush league, it's not even funny. So the ring ultimately became a cluttered hodgepodge like we all knew it would. Windmill punches galore, guys just laying or standing around not doing anything. Again, this is where I started dozing off and not really paying all that close attention. It's a battle royal to determine who goes on for a chance to qualify for a shot at their world championship at an upcoming pay-per-view. So, of course, they have a bunch of job guys in there. The Joker for the match ended up being Andrade. Okay. Really never had any desire to see that guy again. I was kind of hoping after that Darby match where he put him in a coffin, that would have been the cue to write the guy off of TV for good so we wouldn't have to see him ever again. And of course, the million-dollar question everyone kept asking after the realization hit, where's Wardlow? Well, Tony Schiavone apparently knew, and we would find out later what his whole deal was. But for the record, I'm just going to rattle off a list of names here. John Silver, Dante Martin, Lance Archer, Daniel Garcia, Jake Hager, Max Caster, and the Guns. All of these guys were part of this battle royal, despite the fact that I don't think I've ever seen a single one of these guys win a match, period. So, how they all qualified for a chance to become the world champion and Wardlow didn't? Well, I don't know. I could also say the same for guys like Bryan Danielson, FTR, Samoa Joe, or Miro, but I think you get the point. It's also why smart people that see through this company's bullshit don't pay any attention to the rankings because it makes no sense, and the people that still try to justify it are either marks or mentally impeded. So after they eliminated all the guys that I gave a shit about, Powerhouse Hobbs, Ricky Starks, Keith Lee, although that guy's sort of a lost cause at this point, the match boiled down to the final four of Andrade, Kyle O'Reilly, Wheeler Yuta, and Rey Fenix. And at that point, O'Reilly was kind of a last beacon of hope on the credibility scale. So thank God for small favors, he ended up winning. And then I quickly realized that he was wrestling Jon Moxley in the main event, and, well, we'll get to that. Speaking of Mox, he did a pre-taped interview after the match, and between the horrible audio feed and the fact that it was a Mox promo, and I'm pretty much over anything involving this guy at this point, I skipped over this entirely. I do have something to say about the introduction of one of their new belts. The all-inclusive Transatlantic Heavyweight Championship. Actually, I really don't have anything to say about it at all. Why not? It's basically the extent of my thoughts on it. I mean, they've already got 47 other belts on their show that no one ever defends or that we rarely see to begin with, so why not add a 48th? You know, by the way they're going, by the time 2022 is over, I'm sure everyone in this company is going to have a belt in some fashion. This company's got 10,000 other issues they need to be dealing with. You know, booking good television, getting talent over, establishing characters, developing good storylines, all that good stuff. So, well, AEW's got a way to fix it. More belts. Yeah. Whatever. Oh yeah, they're also doing a tournament to crown the new champion. because we literally didn't just see them do a tournament that culminated at their last pay-per-view. Fuck it, let's do another one. So that led us to Pac versus Buddy Matthews, which was the first round of the tournament to crown this new All-Atlantic champion. And again, maybe entirely wrong. Maybe I missed something. So you can all staple my balls to a step stool if, God forbid, I've happened to looked past this or escaped the memory of ever seeing one of their 12,087 talents they have on their show. Was this Buddy's first actual televised singles match in AEW? I've seen Buddy in tag action, but I don't think I've ever seen the guy in an actual one-on-one match on the show. And if you say you need to watch AEW Dark to see that, y'all can go gargle with rusty razor blades. And when the music hit for the House of Black entrance, I was like a split hair away from just skipping over the whole thing entirely, because everything about that group needs to go away and never be spoken of again. However, I'm a big fan of Pac's work, been for a long time. He's always great. He's another guy that I wish would be wrestling on television more than 3 times in a given year, because he's really good. And I'll say this about Buddy. I'm going to put my biases aside for the House of Black nonsense and just focus on him particularly. I've watched him work for a long time, most notably his stuff he did in NXT. I thought WWE probably could have done more with him as a singles guy on the main roster before he ended up leaving the company. And if Buddy Matthews was on his own, doing his own thing, and he wasn't caught up in the god-awful Bray Wyatt knockoff act, I'd probably be more inclined to watch his stuff. But unfortunately, that's not the circumstance we're in right now. It was a very fine match. Pac stuff always looks good. They didn't do anything embarrassingly dumb. And I even like the finish. I'm not the biggest fan of the Poison Rana spot, but at least if you're going to do it, it should either lead to the finish or be the finish entirely, and it ended up leading to the finish here. And that Black Arrow Pac does is still probably one of my favorite high-risk finishers in the business today. Probably because he always wins with it, so I can at least buy it as a credible move. Even if I'm not a big fan of all the aerial stuff. Absolutely right call to have Pac win, and if Miro ends up winning the next round, which I have to presume he is, I'm really going to look forward to seeing him and Pac face off. That could be a really good match. Probably won't save the show from eternal damnation, but it's at least something I can look forward to in the absence of my AEW faves. I can tell you who is no longer one of my AEW faves is Eddie Kingston. He used to be, back when the guy actually mattered and they booked him like a big deal. Now he's losing garbage pay-per-view brawls to Chris Jericho, screaming about this, that, and the other thing, and now I don't care. Because he's feuding with guys that I have no reason to care about. So coming back from the break, we had Trent Beretta in the ring for a promo, and he's bummed out because it's National Best Friends Day, and his friends are not there. And where are they? Who cares? The less I have to see of Chucklefuck Taylor and the company mascot, the better. Just keep those clowns off of television for as long as humanly possible. Anyway, he's talking about the tag match from a couple weeks back with FTR where they got screwed out of the belts. I believe due to a run-in from 2 of the New Japan guys who have not made a single appearance on the show since and were never heard of in any follow-up about it. So Trent calls FTR down to make things right, and out come Cash and Dax. They kind of tease the idea of a rematch, but that's quickly thrown to the side because out comes another fucking New Japan guy who are not the same crew of guys that jumped Roppongi Vice and FTR 2 weeks ago. It is a completely new cast of characters. It's Will Ospreay and 3 other guys that I've never heard of before. And no, Excalibur shouting at me through the television that it's Ospreay's faction from New Japan did not get them over with me. So they jumped the baby faces. Ospreay laid out Trent with a running elbow, and I didn't care. Now, for the record, I have seen Will Ospreay's work in New Japan. Some of it I've enjoyed, some of it not so much. I have no idea how this was supposed to get me excited to see what he's going to be involved with for the Forbidden Door show, and quite frankly, with the way a lot of these guys have been brought in and the way they've been booked in these segments, I don't think I'm going to care about any of these guys' involvement with that pay-per-view. We had William Regal in the Undisputed Era in the back hyping up the main event. Regal basically read O'Reilly his last rites. And Adam Cole said he has to go out and do commentary for the next match. Even though the match did not involve himself, Fish, O'Reilly, or the Bucks in any way, it was Hangman Page versus David Finlay. And why did Adam Cole need to do commentary for Hangman Page versus David Finlay exactly? Well, I have no idea. I guess because Finlay is a member of the Bullet Club, or he was, and Adam Cole was in the Bullet Club at one point, so they have connections or something. I don't fucking know. Does anyone know what's going on with the show more than 90% of the time? God almighty. I've seen more competently booked wrestling shows when Russo was fucking writing. Now that's saying something. Because, oh, you know. But I still maintain that color commentary is probably the best role for Cole right now. Because A, he can keep his shirt on. And B, with the guy or the way that guy's been booked since he's shown up, the longer Cole stays out of the ring, the better, quite frankly. Match was good. Don't really have a whole lot of complaints about the action. It was very basic. Finlay worked over Page's right leg for the heat. Page made a comeback. And they gave Page a TV win after he lost the world title, which is a smart thing to do. And then he got on the stick and said that since it's probably unlikely he's getting another AEW title shot anytime in the future, screw the AEW title. Who cares about that belt? That belt sucks. I want the IWGP Heavyweight title. Because apparently this belt is more prestigious than the AEW belt. Or at least that's how the promo came across to me on television. But more importantly, Hangman Page wants Okada. And who is Okada, you might ask? If you're not well attuned to New Japan and you may have not heard of this legendary IWGP Heavyweight Champion, Kazuchika Okada. Well, you didn't find out here. We also had Cole making the accurate statement that Hangman Page lost at the pay-per-view, so why is he getting rewarded with a chance to win another championship? Which is true, but then you think about the fact that the Bucks also lost to the Hardys, and they're getting rewarded with a title shot, and Jon Moxley's team lost at the pay-per-view, so of course he's ranked number 1, and now he is getting a shot to become the interim world champion at the Forbidden Door show. None of it makes sense, but in the world of AEW, where we defend every stupid finish decision in the world, we just call this long-term booking, I guess. So then we had the Wardlow segment, and we come to find out the reason that he asked to be removed from the Battle Royal in the opener. And, I just figured since we're in the realm of shoot promos in AEW, where everyone just gets to speak their mind freely, I just figured Wardlow was going to be like, I'm not working a match with a bunch of undercard job guys just so I can do a job to Moxley in the main event. That doesn't work for me, brother. But instead, he said that Punk is still technically the recognized AEW World Champion, so until he comes back from injury, he's waiting so Wardlow can beat the real champion. Which, alright, kind of buries the whole concept of the interim champion, but whatever. More important thing is, he's got his eyes set on the TNT title, which is the exact move that they needed to make with him, so I'm glad they're revisiting this. And, of course, they had Scorpio come out and tease getting into the face-off with him, but Lambert and Page held him back and told him to wait because he has a bum knee, which may or may not be legit. I don't really know. I vaguely remember he was favoring his knee after that match he had with Dante last week, so maybe he did hurt himself in that match at some point. But this is all fine. I still think Wardlow shouldn't be doing promos, but if they keep them short and simple like they did here, they won't expose him too badly. What wasn't fine was the announcement that next week on the show, Wardlow is apparently going to be fighting 20 security guards in a gauntlet match. Why? Like, do we really need to go there with Wardlow? No, we don't. He's spent the last several weeks laying out and beating up security guards. It was a great angle in the build-up to the MJF match. It was entertaining. It was enjoyable. But it was also a 15-second snippet of an overall 10-minute segment in most cases. So now they're going to drag this out and make it its own 10-minute segment? Who the fuck wants to see that? Yeah, they're going to try and make it an extended comedy angle, and what'll end up happening is that it's going to go too long, it'll lose its appeal very early on, and the net result, it's going to get Wardlow less over. His focus should be on squashing Scorpio in 30 seconds to win the TNT title. That should be his goal right now. Not wasting his time doing a stupid side comedy feud with Mark Sterling in a neck brace. They also announced next week a 3-way ladder match with the Hardys, the Bucks, and the Jurassic Express for the tag belts. Which sounds like a 5-star classic in the making. You got 2 broken, battered Hardy boys that are like one step away from being in an iron lung. And you've got a giant guy in a dinosaur mask who's barely mobile to begin with. Tie that in with 3 guys that are going to do a bunch of cartwheels and backflips and dangerous bullshit off ladders. Yeah, that'll end up putting more guys on the shelf. Why not? You already got CM Punk out with an injury. I think Adam Cole's dealing with something right now, which is why he's not wrestling. Jeff Hardy was recently taken out of a TV match because he was hurt after the pay-per-view, so fuck it, why not? Let's just keep those injuries rolling. Just stack them up like cordwood. Let's book another dangerous gimmick match where guys are going to recklessly fall and try to kill themselves on television. It's like, how many more guys can we needlessly put out of action for the remainder of the year? So then we had a problem. We had a big problem. Marina Shafir wrestled Thunder Rosa for the women's belt. And God, did it suck a wet cock. For everything that Rosa versus Serena Deeb was at the Double or Nothing show, this is like the exact opposite. Rosa won, and that's about the only redeeming quality I could take away from it. Marina should not be on TV right now, and if that Jade Cargill match wasn't enough evidence, I don't know what else they need at this point. Of course, she tried to beat up Rosa after the bell, but Toni Storm ran out for the save. Okay. The idea of Rosa versus Toni Storm for the belt doesn't seem like a bad idea. Maybe it'll finally give me closure on whether or not my current opinions on Storm are validated. That being that I don't think she's anything all that special. And the main event is Kyle O'Reilly and Jon Moxley, with the winner advancing to the Forbidden Door show for a chance to be crowned interim AEW World Champion. And again, I love O'Reilly, big fan of his work, and I'm glad that Tony's taken the time to capitalize on that because it was something severely lacking from O'Reilly's run in NXT, right up until the tail end of his run, that being O'Reilly working more singles matches. However, with that said, we all knew who was going over here, and didn't make it a lesser bitter pill to swallow. But I at least watched this Moxley match, whereas last week I skipped over it entirely because he was wrestling Daniel fucking Garcia of all people. It was good when O'Reilly was in control, and when Moxley was on offense, it ranged anywhere from meh to, is he even trying to make his shit look real? If there's anything that needs to be put to bed in the wrestling business in 2022, It is the slap exchange where the guys are weakly teeing off on each other with those pussy-looking strikes that look faker than a hooker's boob job. But, like I said, Mox going over was telegraphed from the point they announced him as the number one ranked contender last week. So it's probably going to be him feuding with Punk for the belt once Punk comes back. And in the short term, I'm going to have to suffer through another torturous Jon Moxley world title run, which sounds blissful. But in the meantime, we can keep grasping at straws and trying to savor the good material wherever it may hide. Wasn't a whole lot of it on this show, but things can change in a blink of an eye, as we found out this past week in wrestling. Anyway, let's move on to some good stuff here. NWA World Championship Wrestling, June 7th, 1986. And our show begins with some very interesting worldwide wrestling footage. I'm not entirely sure if this is accurate, but I believe what they were trying to set up here was that Dusty Rhodes was going to wrestle Vernon Deaton, but instead he threw him out of the ring, immediately called Ric Flair out, and that's kind of where they left off with the footage. I would see the full content later on. I also figured out that it was Vernon Deaton because he was wearing the exact same gear during his squash for the 605 episode. If he had not been wearing the same trunks, I would have never been able to figure out it was Vernon. And we'll get to more of this later on, but let the record show here that Ric Flair, NWA World Heavyweight Champion, heel, not only willingly came out to defend his championship in an impromptu match on Worldwide, but he was also apparently standing by dressed to compete. Cutting to the booth with Tony Schiavone and David Crockett, they ended up spewing out a whole lot of news from the jump. The big announcement here is that Magnum TA has been stripped of the U.S. Heavyweight title, per NWA management, because of events that transpired following the press conference with Magnum and the Russians last week. If you recall, the contract signing for the U.S. title match was done to set up the match for this week's show, but because they both got into a physical altercation, Magnum was being punished for his actions. And, by the way, the altercation occurred because Nikita had insulted Magnum's mother, who, as we established last week, was just kind of there for reasons that were never explained. I guess in hindsight it was to set up the angle for this week, but the fact that she was there to begin with, we still don't really know. But upon hearing that we would not be getting Magnum versus Nikita on the show, the studio audience collectively responded with, "Aww." Not booing, not going ballistic and motherfucking the whole thing, just, shucks. How unfortunate. And, well, there was more to come with Magnum, which had not been fully explained here, but at the time they had done this opening promo, the message that they were seeming to indicate was that Magnum was directly stripped of the belt because of the attack to Nikita. However, that's not true, because there was more to the story. They also said here that Ole Anderson was back, and that they would be showing footage of his return later on too. So they followed that whole deal with Ron Garvin doing a promo. And I have noticed a lack of Ronnie Garvin promos on the show in the last couple weeks. Wouldn't say I was completely discouraged by that, but well, they put him out there for one this week. He said stuff. The crux of it was setting up the tape fist match that he's going to be having with Tully Blanchard on the Bash Tour. It is going to be 10 3-minute rounds. Both men's hands will be taped, and I presume it's knockout only, although they didn't exactly explain the rules of the whole thing very clearly. My memory of the Garvin-Tully feud around 86 is pretty scanty, so I'm not entirely sure how this all went down off the top of my head, but I guess we will find out in due time. And then cutting to the ring, the opening match was the Rock and Roll Express versus Kent Glover and Bob Owens. It was during this match where I knew the kind of studio crowd that we were going to be dealing with for the entire show. If they weren't going to be heckling the guys during their matches, they were definitely going to be doing some odd chants. They were also very pro-heel, as we found out by the time Ric Flair came out for his promo. I have no idea why, but the big standout for this one was the people chanting, "It takes two," when Morton and Gibson hit their double dropkick. I have no idea. Perhaps they saw the rock and roll match from a few weeks back where Gibson completely butchered the double dropkick with Ricky, and they wanted to give him a hard time for it. Following that, we had Jim Cornette and Big Bubba Rogers out for a promo. And upon Corny reintroducing Bubba to the crowd, the pro-heel fans all started chanting for him. Even Bubba kind of cracked a smile for a bit there. He broke kayfabe. He also did a promo on Baby Doll, essentially letting her know that if she tries to get in the ring with Corny for a match, she's going to get rendered. Rendered what, you ask? I'm not exactly sure. I'm just going by Corny's delivery. We had Slick Rick out for a promo, and it was at this point where they put the camera on the four well-dressed men in suits in the front row of the crowd standing in front of the Slick Rick sign. Not even trying to mask the fact that Flair was getting massive babyface pops on the show. He talked about the return of Ole, talked about how he's going to beat up Dusty and the rest of the babyfaces that he has to defend his world title against on the tour. As you may remember from last week, they announced that Flair would be defending the title a total of 14 times during the span of the Bash Tour. And I didn't mention this at the time, but I presume that it also meant he would be defending the belt against 14 different opponents, which also meant that they had to come up with 14 number one contenders for the title during the summer. Although in 1986, I find that totally doable. In 2022, not so much. And then we had Manny Fernandez versus Larry Clark. They wrestled for about 30 seconds, and Bull won with the Flying Burrito. It was not as memorable as the follow-up promo with Bull and Jimmy Valiant. Bull's dropping about 30 metaphors for what the Paul Jones Army is going to do once he and Handsome Jimmy all shave them completely bald. I believe one of the lines included him saying that Shaska Whatley will not need air conditioning because the breeze of the wind would be blowing over his bald head. And apparently that would be enough. And then Valiant came in and made the segment 10 times better. First, he let us know that him and Baron Von Raschke were going to be having a black glove on a pole match on the Bash Tour. And if there were two men working for Jim Crockett Promotions in 1986 that I would have paid to see working gimmicked pole matches, it would be the two most immobile guys on the entire roster. That sounds fucking atrocious. Valiant referring to Schiavone here as Tony Schiavanto. Still love that this guy's entire gimmick in 1986 is just fucking everyone's name up on purpose. He's a total loonbat. And they also prepared a workshop photo of Paul Jones and what he would look like once he had his head shaved. An image that, upon pausing it and trying to do a side-by-side comparison with a shaved Paul Jones versus the Hitler-endorsed haircut Jones was trying to sport in 86, got to admit, the shaved head's not an entirely bad option. We then had the full-length Dusty Flair World Title match from Worldwide TV. And again, once you get past the weirdness with Flair being fully dressed and ready to compete in this impromptu world title match against Dusty with no build or hype, it's a fun little highlight package they threw together here. It is also every Flair Dusty match in the book, where Dusty takes about 95% of the whole thing, and Flair's just a whipping boy from start to finish. Obviously, it is a free television match, so the Horseman run-in was to be expected. But while Tully, Arn, and Flair are doing the 3-on-1 beatdown, outruns the returning Ole Anderson. Of course, they're putting the boots to Dusty until a bunch of babyfaces run out for the save. I guess I should more accurately point out, when I say that Tully and Arn ran in for the attack with Flair, Dusty also began to make a comeback on all three men and was winning until Ole ran in to make the big save. Because God forbid Dusty looks vulnerable in an outnumbered scenario. And then we quickly cut to the interview booth for an Oli promo, and God almighty, dude. You want to talk about promo work that needs to be studied from the people in the business today? Oli should be at the top of the list for everyone, especially if you're a heel. Telling Dusty he's got two choices to make. He can either stay down for the count, or if he gets back up again, the Horsemen will beat him so bad, even his Papa the Plumber won't recognize him when they're done with him. There's also a great line in here where Oli was showing his face mask that they ripped off from Ricky during the beatdown, and as he's trying to do a heat promo on the Rock and Roll Express, he's also trying to remember the name of their team, so he just goes, "What are they called?" And then he closed out by promising Dusty that their issues won't be resolved until... well, we never found out. Either the audio feed glitched during the pre-tape, or Oli said something so divisive that they had to bleep the audio out on television. I have no clue what he could have possibly said that they needed to censor it, but I guess we'll never know. He did promise that the Horsemen were going to get rid of Dusty Rhodes, and he had made references to shovels and burial grounds, so maybe he said something about pissing on his grave? No idea. So then we get the big follow-up angle on the stripping of Magnum's United States Heavyweight title. And again, just to kind of reestablish the scene for everyone, we found out at the top of the program that Magnum was stripped of the belt and that it was due to the fallout from the incident with the contract signing between him and Nikita. However, they showed a pre-tape with Magnum and President Bob Geigel, where Geigel had read a prepared message that Magnum was being reprimanded for his actions on putting his hands on Nikita during the press conference. Yes, he received a slap on the wrist, essentially. But the incident that led to Magnum being stripped of the title was what happened in this very pre-tape, as Magnum tells Bob Geigel to reprimand this, and he sucker punches the NWA president in the jaw, drops him on the floor, and then he just walks off. And they follow that with showing a second pre-tape with Geigel, where he issued the official statement on behalf of the board of directors, with Magnum being stripped of the belt, not for attacking Nikita, but for punching Geigel and putting his hands on management. And the best part of the whole thing, by far, they cut back to the booth, and David Crockett responds to the situation by saying, "It's not right," and without hesitation, one single female in the studio retorts with, "Yes, it is." I may have been the only human being alive that caught that, but God, that was a great line. And, I mean, I could go on for hours about this if I wanted to, like all the continuity questions I have looking at it under a microscope in 2022, but I think I'll just summarize it as follows. Magnum TA punching the NWA president Bob Geigel because Magnum was upset that his mother was insulted on live television. Not what I would call a justifiable situation, especially when the end result is having the belt forcibly taken from him when the reality is the guy probably should have known better. I mean, it's not like Magnum TA was a loose cannon type character to begin with. I mean, this guy was as white meat babyfaces come in the business. So they follow this up after commercial with bringing out the Russians to talk about the situation. And Ivan's essentially pleading his case that Nikita should already be awarded the belt. So Jim Crockett Jr. comes out, and he issues the best of 7 series that they're going to have throughout the Bash Tour to determine the real champion. So for historical purposes, because I had grown up watching some of these tapes around this time, I remember the best of 7 with Magnum and Nikita. I had totally forgotten about all the story leading to getting there. Contract deal, Magnum clocking Bob Geigel in the face and being stripped of the belt, that stuff went completely over my head. And of course, as I look at it now, the first thing I ask is, how in the world is Magnum allowed to even wrestle for the championship after punching the NWA president in the face on live camera? At the very least, the dude probably would have been heavily fined or suspended, but the fact that they even let him compete for the belt after they literally just stripped him of it, I don't know, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. So, getting back to ring action, we had Tully and Arn versus George South and Randy Mulkey. I wrote absolutely nothing down about this, except probably what will end up being one of my all-time classic finishes for NWA Studio Wrestling. The heels hit Mulkey with the Gourd Buster, and they've got the camera perfectly angled where, as the heels are covering him for the pin, you see George South in the background, and he's not entering the ring to attempt to break up the fall. He's exiting the ring and leaving because he took one look at Mulkey after taking the Gourd Buster and determined, well, this fucker's dead. I have no idea why I found this so funny, but I rewound it like twice. I couldn't stop laughing. Like, we've definitely seen job guys on these shows not bother to break up pinfall attempts at the end, but I don't think I've ever seen anyone actively decide against breaking up a pinfall attempt. Like, South could have easily run in and dived on the Horseman to break that up. Instead, he's like, nah, just live to fight another day, brother. It's not worth it. We had a Bash Tour update, but more importantly, we had Tony Schiavone interviewing Waylon Jennings, as he was going to be one of the integral acts in the music festivities for the Bash Tour. And while I'll concede I did not grow up listening to Waylon Jennings, I ended up thoroughly enjoying this interview. For one, it was an actual authentic interview and not one of those overly scripted WWF celebrity sound bites that we've seen throughout the years. But the other thing I liked about it is that in addition to talking about his new upcoming album drops and the backstories behind the top songs on the record, he began drawing comparisons to how music performances fit into the scope of sports. And he mentions how you can try music with baseball or basketball. It normally doesn't work. But in professional wrestling, there's a natural gel where the people can appreciate it. And when I heard that line, I thought, you know what? That is a really good point. This did go on for a while, and I did kind of find myself tuning in and out of it. But I did catch the closing part where Jennings asked Tony if he wrestled, and Tony nonchalantly responded with, no, not at all. Probably thinking to himself, you think I'd be crazy enough to get in there and try to do a collar and elbow tie-up with Jimmy fucking Valiant or the fucking Barbarian? Gotta be out of your mind, dude. We followed this with Baby Doll coming out for a promo, and she was mostly there to draw attention to a Dusty Rhodes inset promo. I did, however, take note of Baby Doll's getup here, specifically her top hat, which had what I believe was a snake sticking out of the center with its mouth open. Fashion trends. But turning it over to Dusty, he's standing ringside in the empty studio. I guess they shot this either before or after the taping when no one was in the building. And while he covered a lot of ground here is the main gist of what I gathered. He took a brief pot shot at the WWF and their Saturday morning comedy wrestling, telling all the fans to tune in and watch the real professional wrestling with real blood feuds. And then he called out Ole Anderson for being a redneck, talked about how they were going to settle their score once and for all, and even though they pledged that their rivalry will never be over, if it turns out that this will be the final stamp in their feud, Dusty wants Ole to put it all out on the table. I believe he said, leave no stone unturned, no rock unthrown, and no glass unbroken. Just Ole and Dusty one-on-one to settle it all. Nothing else matters. God, you talk about real, true, underrated, long-term rivalries. Dusty and Ole, man. It's as classic as it comes. Then Nikita Koloff wrestled Todd Champion, another guy that I have absolutely no recollection of in the business, despite the fact that when his name was brought up, I was like, you know, it does sound oddly familiar. Turns out that Todd Champion was another one of those guys that sort of bounced and hopped around to all kinds of promotions throughout his career. He never really stayed in one particular area for an extended period of time. I think he did some occasional jobs in the WWF and WCW during the early to mid-90s. He apparently wrestled for All Japan for a brief stint, as I found out. That said, being relatively new to the business here in '86, the guy had a strong showing here against Nikita. Yeah, factoring in Nikita's ring experience by this point, considering he was pretty green himself, I thought the two worked perfectly fine together. Nikita won with the Russian sickle, but the announcers did put Champion over here in the end, so you could tell management was impressed with him in the early goings. Not sure how much longer he stuck around, though. Tully and JJ did a promo, and I wrote this down as a snide remark, but it's also not entirely inaccurate, so I'm going to read it anyway. Tully proceeded to hype up a tape fist match with Ronnie Garvin by not talking about Ronnie, but instead name-dropping Dusty Rhodes about 100 times. Not exactly sure what Tully was going for in this promo. That was followed with Magnum TA doing a promo, and he's obviously miffed and outraged about being stripped of the U.S. belt from NWA management. So, of course, he comes out with a belt in the hand. But this is a really good Magnum promo. Basically talks about how the physical championship is just a bunch of leather and metal, but the issues with him and the Russians go beyond the belt at this point. He says that Nikita stooped to a new low when he insulted Magnum's mother, and if he has to beat up those no-good commie Russians 7 times during the Bash Tour to prove a point, then so be it. You know, I was just thinking about this, and I do want to keep this moving here because there was a lot of stuff that happened on the show this week. But in case you didn't grow up watching Magnum TA and you need some historical reference to compare how much progress that guy made in the business in such a short time, just working up to that top level, go back and listen to Magnum's Mid-South promos from like 83 or 84, and then fast forward to the NWA in 86, just a couple years later. It's almost like two entirely different people. Like the confidence that guy gained was such an impeccable feat. I mean, he surrounded himself with the right guys, so he learned from the best of the best. But Magnum TA, man, it's such a shame the way his career ended. It really is. Because this guy was so hot for a period in the business, and it was all just yanked away at a completely inopportune time. It's a damn shame. Shaska Watley and the Barbarian versus the Italian Stallion and Jim Dawson. And once again, it is a Paul Jones Army match, so of course the highlight is everything that happens at the interview desk with Tony and David. This time it is Paul Jones doing a scathing heel promo on the photoshopped image that Bull and Valiant showed earlier. And his message here is essentially, I never want to see that image again. So, of course, within seconds of that statement, they just put the image back on screen again for everyone to see. I died laughing. I also died at whatever in the fuck Watley was doing in this match with his shucking and jiving routine. It was almost like he was trying to imitate a version of the Fargo strut, but with the way he was swaying his hips here, it ended up looking 1,000 times better than the strut. There was also a fabulous point in this match where Barbarian gave Dawson a military press slam, except instead of vigilantly lifting Dawson overhead and planting him back first on the mat very safely, Barbarian just kind of carelessly scooped him up in the air and almost dumped him right on his head. And if you can picture in your mind the visual of a mannequin or a blow-up doll falling straight down to the ground with limbs unmoving, that was basically Jim Dawson taking the bump for this press slam. I rewound it several times to watch it. It was funny every time I went back to see it. So Wadley hit Dawson with a superplex for the pin, and they immediately tried to do the beatdown afterwards with the job guys. But Raging Bull, Jimmy Valiant, and someone else ran out for the save. I think it might have been Ronnie Garvin for some reason. And the big angle here is that while the faces are running up the heels, they restrain Shaska in the ring, they trap him, and they proceed to cut off maybe like 1.5 inches of his hair. I also laughed at Paul Jones teasing that he was about to run in to try and make the save, but after Valiant kicked the ropes with his foot, Paul Jones decided better of it and just walked away. Yes, Paul Jones was going to try to run in there with Ronnie Garvin, Jimmy Valiant, and the Raging Bulls standing there. What a prick. This might have been my favorite thing on the entire show looking back. There was so much comedy to this, I can't even begin to describe how hard I laughed at some of the stuff in this segment. We had a quick Wahoo McDaniel promo where he was talking about Jimmy Garvin. And then they cut to another Worldwide Wrestling pre-tape with him and Steve Riegel doing a double beatdown on Wahoo. As we remember from last time, Garvin and Wahoo were being set up for a series of Indian strap matches for the Bash Tour. Wahoo then wrestled Lee Peak. I did appreciate the single person in the crowd that was valiantly behind Lee Peak in this match. Must have been a relative. The only other thing of note here was the finish, where Wahoo had tried to pin Peak near the ropes, but Pee Wee Anderson was giving him a hard time because they were too close to the ropes for him to count. So, in order to fix it, did Wahoo just get up and move Peak like 2 inches away from the ropes? No. Instead, he stayed there in a pinning position, and Pee Wee tried to forcibly shove Wahoo away from the ropes, and upon realizing that there was no way on God's green earth he was going to budge this big fucker, he just counted the 3 anyway. I also believe Wahoo got into a shouting match with the crowd afterwards, so yeah, there were definitely some hecklers on this one. Have I ever mentioned how much I love wrestling? Or at least how much I used to love wrestling when it was good? Then the Midnights wrestled Robert Burrows and Vernon Deaton. It was preceded with Jim Cornette doing another promo on Baby Doll, making fun of her cowgirl getup by saying she was more cow than girl. I popped. I also popped at his line in this match where Corny said that Vernon Deaton has a drug problem because he gets drug around the ring every time he's in there wrestling the Midnights. Aside from that, it was the usual Midnight extended squash. I couldn't tell this for sure, but I was watching Dennis in this match. I'm like 80% sure he was bleeding from the forehead at one point. I have no idea why. Perhaps he popped a blood vessel realizing that he and Bobby were in there working against guys with 2 left feet. But then we got the real highlight of the show. The Rock and Roll Express Contest Series. They actually dedicated a segment of the program to this. And I'm going to try to do it justice, although I don't know if I'm going to be able to live up to the greatness. Okay, so first of all, it should be noted that in order for something like this to get signed off on, somebody in 1986 had to have originally thought that this was a good idea. How in the fuck they tried to rationalize this, I have no idea, but nevertheless, there are apparently 3 separate rock and roll contests where the fans are going to be able to participate to spend a day with Ricky and Robert. A Rock and Roll Express look-alike contest for boys and girls, with the winning selections getting to spend a day with Ricky Morton and Robert Gibson at Six Flags. The second being the Miss Rock and Roll Express contest. I believe they said open to ages 13 or 14 to 17, where girls must send in photos of their pageant dresses. I believe they said images cannot exceed a 4x5 photo. I have no clue why, but just roll with it. And the final of these contests being a win a date with the Rock and Roll Express, open to ages 18 and up. And in order to be considered for entries, all female applicants must provide a statement as to why they believe they should win a date with Morton and Gibson. They had to provide a thesis paper to earn the right to win a date with Ricky and Robert. See, nowadays, all you need to do is set up an OnlyFans account, show a picture of your fake cleavage, and you'll get guys hitting up your DMs in no time. But in 1986, the ladies actually had to work for the approval of men. And they're running down all the regulations and everything for this. The only thing I could think the entire time, if they tried this in 2022, lawsuit city. Morton and Gibson would have been hashtag Me Too'd, and that would have been the last we'd ever heard of them in any redeeming light. I seriously need to know if Ricky and Robert have any recollection of this and what they were thinking the entire time Tony was running down the contest for this thing. Probably standing there thinking, God, I hope we don't get hit with harassment charges. Because that's totally what I would have been thinking if I were Ricky or Robert standing there listening to all this. I really need to do some deep diving into the Rock and Roll Contest series and see if I can find more details with how far they went with all this. Ron Garvin wrestled Big Bill Tab. The last 10 seconds of this match pretty much summed up everything, as Tab goes for a running clothesline at Garvin toward the rope, and after Garvin ducked the clothesline, Tab goes ass over tea kettle into the ropes, and Garvin just kind of stands there, and then he just fires back and hits him with a knockout punch. These NWA jobbers sucked, if that wasn't totally apparent by now. Unless your name was George South. We had Raging Bull and Jimmy Valiant back out for a completely redundant promo that I wrote absolutely nothing down about. They promised to shave some bald-headed geeks. The James Gang then did a promo, and as you may recall from last time, the hilarity of the James Boys gimmick was that Magnum and Dusty made absolutely no effort to even try to hide the fact that it was them under masks. And this was no different. Dusty was speaking exactly as he normally does, lisp and all, and Magnum TA sounded exactly like Magnum. I did, however, like the fact that Dusty takes the time during this promo to insult the studio fans, because they're obviously well aware that it's Dusty under a mask and they're giving him shit for it. And then we had Jimmy Garvin and Steve Riegel teaming up against Rocky King and Paul Garner. Moreover, it's Steve Riegel doing mostly a 2-on-1 handicap match, while Garvin is out on the floor for about 50% of it, sucking face with Precious. And the finish is Riegel getting the pin on Garner with the Russian leg sweep. Yeah, imagine that. A Russian leg sweep being a finish in a wrestling match. The match was a total nothing, but the final promo with Garvin and Riegel was something to behold. Garvin pulls out a newspaper, and he proceeds to ad-lib a fake article in the paper on Wahoo McDaniel. I believe it was something having to do with the job listing section looking for a broken-down, battered Indian. Qualifications being TP repair, which he deliberately specifies TP and not TV repair. Tour guide, but only daytime shift, because Wahoo's afraid of the dark. And after the heels have a hearty laugh at all this nonsense, Garvin then infers that there's nobody qualified to wrestle him on the Bash Tour, so he begins outright burying every babyface on the roster. The best line being the shot at Magnum crying about his mama, and if only she knew that Magnum was a dancer in San Francisco, she'd have kicked him out of the house a long time ago. And again, I cannot do Gorgeous Jim Garvin justice, but the more I watch of him on both these shows in 86 and talking about him on World Class in 83, God, I wish I'd have gotten a chance to watch more of his stuff from a younger age, because that guy is remarkable. And speaking of remarkable, how about that show? That ranged everywhere on the spectrum from good to bad to what the fuck to unsettling to hilarious to almost every adjective you can find in an English dictionary. Everything you could possibly describe a wrestling show, write it down on a list, because chances are it would describe this very episode in one form or another. There was a lot of stuff in that hour and a half time frame, but God, was it entertaining. Especially the Rock and Roll Express contest. that has got to be one of wrestling's greatest unsolved mysteries. Look, forget about the Montreal Screwjob. There needs to be a Dark Side of the Ring series dedicated to the behind-the-scenes footage and details of the Rock and Roll Express contest series, because there's information there that I need to have access to. I need to know every particular of how this was allowed, who signed off on it, who came up with the concept in general, and if there are actual postcards that people send in for these contests, and if they even still have these in record on file. All right, let's see if we can get through this one a little swifter, because that episode of WCW took a lot out of me. Not sure how much longer my voice is going to hold out. We've been doing pretty well, though, for this week. The program begins with Bill Mercer doing his best Don West impression to hype up the main event 8-man tag. I don't think I've ever heard anyone show as much passion and enthusiasm for trying to get people excited for an 8-man elimination tag. Although in the year 1983, you could probably bet that you saw something like this maybe once every 3 or 4 months instead of, every fucking week. So it is entirely possible that these matches actually used to have more buzz and excitement to them, when they were actually attraction matches and not just status quo TV matches like they are now. By the way, I should also note here that the Reunion Arena Star Wars event was coming up for June 17th, so they spent most of the show hard selling that event. The first match was Chris Adams versus Toriyatsu. It's been a few weeks since we've seen Arman Hussein. I believe the last we saw of him, he was getting laid out by Kamala, so I'm sure he was super enthralled to be hearing the news that he would be wrestling Kamala at the Star Wars show. I would probably say that of all the Toriyatsu matches I've covered on World Class so far, this would rank among the better ones. Most of that being due to the action being carried by Chris Adams. But this wasn't a terrible opener. Things definitely picked up once Adams started doing the whole super kick party deal at the end. People really popped when he gave Hussein the thrust kick and knocked him off the apron. I guess the one thing I found funny here, during the match, they announced that Yatsu would be wrestling Kamala at the upcoming Star Wars show as part of the handicap match. So, in order to build him up for a handicap match with Kamala, he does a clean job to Chris Adams. By today's standards, I would probably be cocking my head sideways at that booking decision, but then the reality hit me that they also booked an 8-man elimination tag on this show where a lot of their main event guys were also taking pinfalls on the go-home show, and they're also booked in some pretty high-stake matches for the card as well, so is what it is. After that, we had a Freebirds promo at Poolside, and there was a lot of material in this promo here, so hopefully I end up covering it all by the end. It begins with Buddy Roberts hyping up his match with the Iceman. He informs us that he has traded his barber clippers for hair removal cream, and his plan is to smear this cream all over Parsons' head to not only remove all of the hair from his head in one big glop, but apparently this removal cream is also good for wiping away the man's entire facial features. So by the end of the show on Sunday, we could in fact see the Iceman lose his nose, eyes, and mouth. I want to know what the fuck kind of chemicals are in this removal cream. Sounds toxic. We also had Terry Gordy throwing a quick little tidbit here. He essentially lets us know that he's hoping Kerry's partner is someone competitive. Because, Gordy doesn't get paid to wrestle job guys. He wants actual competition, brother. And then Hayes rattled off a bunch of baby faces that he knows will not be teaming with Kerry because he's done his homework. And between guys wrestling out of state or internationally, or in the case of Dusty, being too fat, Bill Mercer also laughed at this joke, Hayes is convinced that Kerry will not have a partner for the show. And, this is all fantastic. I loved Buddy Roberts diving into the pool with a ball cap on, which then promptly led to Terry Gordy stopping his portion of the interview mid-sentence so that he could help Buddy float above the water. I'm guessing he couldn't swim? My only complaint about this segment, there's a part in this interview where Mercer is with Hayes, and while he's cutting the promo, Terry Gordy shows up behind them on the diving board, and he does a full moonsault plancha into the pool behind them. Really should have had the camera zoomed out for that, because I wanted to see that. So then we had a Mongol squash against Ken Johnson. The match was kind of there. The main thing I got out of the whole segment was the announcement as to whom Kerry's partner was going to be at the Reunion Arena. Mercer let us know that Kerry's partner was going to be Bruiser Brody. And we will get to Hayes' response to that news-breaking bulletin momentarily. It was kind of funny that they chose this part of the show to plug that. It's like they knew in the back of their heads nobody's going to give two fucks about the Mongol versus Ken Johnson, so that was as good as time as any to announce Kerry's partner for the show. Mongol run with a running stampede, and immediately after the bell, Mercer teleported himself down to ringside to interview Skandar Akbar. And I'll admit, I wrote absolutely nothing down about his verbiage, because about 30 seconds into the actual dialogue, Michael Hayes came storming into the camera frame and started pacing back and forth, and I was totally distracted by this. I paid absolutely no attention to anything the General said. But Hayes is irate about this Bruiser Brody situation. He is convinced that it's all a fabrication. There's no way on earth that Brody is Kerry's partner, and he's going to make a phone call to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that Bruiser Brody will not, in fact, be at the Reunion Arena to wrestle the Freebirds for the tag straps. I didn't like the main premise here. Like, the fact that Michael Hayes figured that Brody was going to be wrestling in Japan. So by default, there was no way he was going to be able to make the Star Wars event. And of course, Bill Mercer, the sound rational man, responds with, "It's called a plane flight, dude. The guy can be in and out of Japan in one day." Guess Hayes figured international travel was like intergalactic travel. That it would take Brody about 3 million light years to fly to the States for this tag match. Again, I used to love professional wrestling, man. When heels were fucking stupid. It's good times. We had a Kevin Von Erich interview before the main event. Not a whole lot to the actual promo material. Just promised us that he was going to beat Flair and become the new World Heavyweight Champion. They also replayed the video package with Kevin pinning Flair on Dallas TV from several weeks back, and they showed the follow-up promo with Flair in the locker room. They also announced here that the match was going to be no over-the-top rope DQ rules, and if Flair were to intentionally DQ himself at any point, the belt would automatically be awarded to Kevin. So some good selling points for the show. And that brought us to the main event, 8-man tag action. It is all 3 members of the Freebirds teaming with Gorgeous Jim Garvin versus all 3 members of the Von Erichs and the Iceman King Parsons. So in other words, it is a Survivor Series tag match on free television several days before the Star Wars event. And between the hilarity of the audio issues we had in this match, where Bill Mercer was going through wobbly audio waves and several intonation changes, and the fact this also seemed to be randomly tornado rules, I really didn't know a whole lot about the particulars about the match, especially in the early goings. If you watched Dynamite last week, and you all remember that 10-man tag cluster with the Bucks and Red Dragon and Jungle Boy and all those guys, that was pretty much this match, except this match had less incoherent flips and dives. It was a jumbled mess. Within the first 3 minutes, they had cleared out about half the guys, and I had no idea who got pinned, mostly because I was trying to rapidly catch up on notes from the previous segment. They also announced that it was over-the-top rules, so it was entirely possible that guys were thrown over the top rope, and I had totally missed it. It boiled down to the final 4 of Kevin and Kerry against Buddy Roberts and Michael Hayes. They're kind of just doing stuff to each other for a while. Lots of near falls. And finally, the Von Erichs double drop kick Hayes out of the ring. They attempt a double drop kick on Buddy, but Hayes grabs Buddy's ankle and saves him as the Von Erichs crash and burn. Hayes then gives Kerry a double axe off the top to pin and eliminate him. And then in a fantastic finishing deal, Hayes and Roberts go to dump Kevin over the top rope, but Kevin manages to flip them both over, and then in a feat of strength that I don't think I've ever seen before, Kevin does a reverse skin the cat, and he gets back into the ring and wins the match for his team. And when I say he skinned the cat in reversal, I am not exaggerating that in the slightest. Keep in mind, Kevin was built like a brick house to begin with, but the bodily control to be able to flip two guys over the top rope, and then you're able to hang upside down on the apron with your arms basically wedged behind you, holding onto the bottom set of ropes, being able to pull yourself back into the ring from the apron like that. I mean, I'm not saying it can't be done, but I've never seen anyone try it, at least not in modern wrestling today. And of course, this was followed with the Von Erichs doing a great little babyface promo to close out the show. Somehow the sweatiest of the bunch was David, who spent significantly less time in the actual match than Kevin or Kerry did. So he was either doing some heavy cardio before coming out for the match, or maybe he just dumped a bottle of water on his head before he came out for the promo. But they're all hyping up their matches for the Star Wars show. For the record, David would be wrestling Jim Garvin for the Texas Heavyweight title, which is currently vacant. Kerry was teaming with Bruiser Brody to go after Hayes and Gordy for the tag belts. And Kevin had Ric Flair for the world title. It's a pretty packed show. All of which should be good. And I will be watching the Reunion Arena show for next week. And we're going to tie that in with the retro show. Haven't yet determined what I'll be doing with the follow-up World Class episode. If it's a recap show from the actual Star Wars event, I probably won't spend a whole lot of time on it. We can just focus more on the actual show and talk about those matches at greater length. All that and more planned for next week's edition of the 5-Star Wrestling Report. Thanks for watching, everyone, and we'll be back this coming Monday. Coming up, we've got AEW Rampage, and we'll figure out what the deal is with the Always Ready pay-per-view. Things are looking kind of bleak for that show right now. Well, with the main event picture kind of being in jeopardy with the Matt Cardona situation, if I can find a way to stream that show, I will give it a watch and see if there's anything worth really discussing on that show for Monday. Of course, we've always got substitutions that we can put in place, but as it stands right now, I know for a fact that I am not ordering that show to watch it. So, yeah, we'll see what happens. Anyway, thanks for stopping in. Again, give the show a like if you enjoyed it. Leave a comment below to share your thoughts on anything we discussed today. Subscribe as well if you haven't done so already. And take care, all. Peace out.